Okay, so it's 7 now. We're going to get started. Welcome to a new Current Conversations. We are very excited to get an update tonight from Dr. Phil Benante, who's the superintendent at Haldane. We're going to be talking now halfway through a very challenging school year. We're going to get an update on the district's experience so far and what lies ahead. As always, we're going to be open to questions. You can submit your questions along the way at any point using the Q&A button that you can find at the bottom of your screen. And we'll try to get to as many as we can in the time we have. I know our editor, Chip Rowe, has a bunch of questions himself. So without further ado, I'll hand it over, Chip, so you can get started.
All right, thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Dr. Benante, for taking the time.
Thank you, Chip.
We spoke in August. I actually went back and read the transcript of our conversation to see if there was anything, which I have some questions based on that, because at the time it was wide open and it was very interesting to look at kind of what you expected or didn't know what to expect and kind of compare to where we are now, more than halfway into the school year. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to start, I guess, by asking about the teachers and this kind of wide open vaccination process where they just keep opening it and opening. And, you know, I hear from a lot of readers, like, how do I sign up? I can't sign up. And the teachers and everyone over 65 and people with immune system compromise, whatever, are kind of thrown into this big, you know, I think in Putnam, there's 30,000 people now who qualify.
Right.
How do are the teachers kind of on their own to try to get a vaccine? Is that where it's at?
They have some support. I'd like to think that it is a little bit like the wild, wild west out there right now when it comes to trying to schedule a vaccine appointment. And we see this as a critical part of our ability to eventually fully open. But the good news is the Putnam County Department of Health has reserved or hosted several educator-specific vaccination pods, which has allowed us to support our teachers in getting appointments that are only reserved for educators in Putnam County. Those fill very quickly. I think there have been 3 thus far, and I think each of them has filled within 5 minutes. So right. You can imagine that even with these pods set up, it's still difficult to come by a vaccination appointment. That being said, for our teachers specifically, we feel that we have at least somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 90% of our teachers who either have received their first dose or are scheduled to by the end of this first month. And that's incredibly important. Yeah. Now, the unanticipated consequence of this was that several of our educators, for example, this week are getting their second dose. And because the pods were set up in the way that they were, you may have read that it's more common for individuals to have a significant reaction to the second dose of the vaccine than the first dose. So we are running up against an issue today and for the next 2 days where either several of our educators had to stay home sick today, or we're anticipating now that they will in the next 2 days. And again, the volume is so high. We have 10, 12 teachers a day who are potentially getting the vaccine. So we had to coordinate around that. So we made tomorrow an all remote learning day in anticipation that we were going to have a number of staff call in sick. We made it an all remote learning day for students in grades 6 through 12. And then Friday will be an all remote learning day for all students. Again, just looking at the schedule that our teachers are on and anticipating that a number of them are going to be maybe out because they're going to need that time to rest up and recover from the second dose. So it's that was not something I think we were anticipating, not only back in August, but 2 weeks ago when we were.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the idea of the vaccine, I get the sense people misunderstand what that means. You know, you're vaccinated. It doesn't mean the teacher is going to come into the class without a mask and
Correct.
They're protected. You can still get COVID. You can still pass it on to other people, but it keeps the teacher from getting sick, getting seriously sick, right?
Correct. So it's a layer of protection for the individual who's vaccinated. And then in addition to that, for the herd immunity that we've all
Yeah, that
probably
we're
read
all
enough about. So,
right.
but no, it won't prevent anybody from having to quarantine if they're exposed, because you could still be carrying the vaccine. So that's a misconception that many have, that we're going to get to this point where, whether it be as a school or whether it be as a community at large, where 80-90% of our of individuals within our community will be fully vaccinated, doesn't mean that the guidelines go away. There'll still be social distancing, there'll still be mask wearing, again, and until such time that the experts in the field, if you will, determine that that's no longer necessary. But I think this is going to be a reality that we're
Yeah.
faced with for quite some time.
Well, I looked it up today. You've had 24 students and 12 teachers, and the state requires each district to report
Yes.
since the beginning of the year whenever someone tests positive. Thinking back to August, I guess there was no idea how it was going to go, but maybe talk briefly about the protocol. I mean, what happens when a student gets test positive? Do they generally, the parents are informing you, like they call and say, we have a positive test or whatever, and then something kicks into gear that you've set up that we were talking about in August?
Exactly. So there's an established process or protocol that we follow, that we've developed in collaboration with the Department of Health to begin contact tracing. So our primary emphasis, if we receive word that a student or a staff member was inside of school during a period of time when they were potentially infectious, is to contain whatever or whoever they may have been exposed to. So generally this year, as this has played out, we've been fortunate to be able to do that in an expeditious manner. It has not interfered generally with our ability to open school the next day, except for today. So we actually had a case this morning. And I
Right,
said to
right.
Julia Sniffen, our high school principal, I said, geez, it's amazing that we got to February and we haven't been faced with this yet. But this morning we received word first thing in the morning, which isn't the best time, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And we just, out of an abundance of caution, decided to close or make the high school all remote for today, so we could facilitate the contact tracing process. So that involves a discussion with the family or the student, serving as in a Department of Health role at that point. That the Department of Health has become so overwhelmed with not even contact tracing anymore. It's really vaccine distribution and other elements of this, that schools are really responsible for notifying families if they have to have their child quarantined, which typically at the beginning of the year, we thought that was something that the Department of Health would be doing. And they just can't handle the volume of it. So we're able to, again, we have contact information readily available to us for staff and students. So we're able to facilitate that process and limit the potential for any additional exposure. All this being said, I think up to this point, we've had approximately 200 to 250, so taken into consideration today, students and staff who've been quarantined because of a potential exposure, and there have not been any additional. It has not led to anybody else getting sick that we're aware of. So that's good news. So these precautions, which I'm sure we're going to talk about a little bit, because there's some thoughts now how we could further adapt to that.
Well, I think
that's good news.
I think you see the families did, finding out if she had to go into quarantine, because we knew she would be very unhappy about that. My son has been in quarantine at Garrison a couple times. But I think the fact that, that you don't have to quarantine every single student every time somebody gets a positive test kind of speaks to the way this is working, right? That it's
right.
Limiting the exposure to people so that the contact tracing is limited. And that's sort of the idea behind the masks. And it isn't that somebody's going to get sick, but once they do, the contact tracing is much smaller.
Exactly.
Steps that you're taking.
And it's no one effort, I think, that is leading to our ability to, I would say, navigate a successful school year, all things considered. It's a combination of these efforts, contact tracing being one of them, utilizing a quarantine process, distancing within the school, mask wearing, hand washing. It's the combination of all of those that really enable our school campus to remain safe. The issue is going to be, if we want to bring more students into school at some point, and there's a lot now coming out, a lot of articles being written on this. When can we return all students into school? Is the impact that that may have on any one of those variables, and how would we know? Because the biggest limiting factor is going to be the distancing component. So in our high school, where our classes tend to have more students, from a 6-foot distance to a 3-foot distance would allow us to bring more students in. But we want to make informed decisions about that. And the current research on it is limited. There is some good news, I think, and some promising news that potentially limiting or reducing distancing inside of our classrooms to 3 feet may be equally effective. But I don't think we're quite there yet. And I don't think that's an individual school's decision to make. This is where we really look to our partnership with the Department of Health to guide us on something like that. But generally, all of these measures that we're taking, that we had planned for through the summer, I think have demonstrated to be effective. And I'd include in that through the fall, our kids were outside a lot. We did a lot to make sure that our staff had a sense of confidence that our ventilation system was at the standards that the CDC was recommending. And all of those factors contributed to having a really successful fall. We knew January and February were going to be tough, just because it's a time of really increased illness in any community.
Well, I'm just finding them mentally health tough. It's kind of, this seems like you can't go outside anyway, and then the snow doesn't help. But
it's a grind for sure.
What happens? This is a question from somebody watching, which is a good one. And this happens in my house. Even just like a third level thought. I guess.
It's definitely an
what
added
is the
layer.
protocol on that?
So siblings of individuals who've been direct contacts are not required to quarantine. They're considered a contact of a contact. So when we consider that any individual who was a direct contact, so if your son was at school and he was in a class with somebody who had a confirmed case, he's considered a contact. But the likelihood of him having actually contracted COVID is minimal. Again, because of all those other precautions that are being taken, it is one of several precautions that we'll take. So students or siblings who find themselves living in the same home are not required to quarantine. They're considered a contact of a contact. And we've discussed this. There are feelings that we should be implementing a higher standard where those siblings would be required to stay home. We've decided not to do so. And I think up to this point, the facts demonstrate that of all the students who've had to quarantine, the fact that none of them have gotten sick illustrates that we don't need to go that one step further of also having their siblings stay home.
Now you got COVID, I think, last month, right?
Did, a few weeks ago.
Yeah. And so what was it like? What was it like? No, I mean, what, did you feel flu-y? Was it cold like, or?
Yeah, so sure. My symptoms were really mild. And I was fortunate in that way. It definitely felt different than a regular flu bug. Even though my symptoms were not perhaps as significant as having the flu, I wouldn't qualify them as such. It just felt different. It's hard to explain. My symptoms were relatively short in duration, but I definitely went through the range of feeling pressure in my chest, all the way through what I equated to a bad sinus infection. It almost felt like a sinus infection, at least for me. I did lose my sense of taste and smell, which
you did lose
tough.
them.
I did. Yep. I do have both back now. That's good. Was significant. After doing that, I said, I'm not going to do that again. And this is it's serious. It's a serious illness.
Well, no, I asked because it is interesting. Part of my wife and I wonder if we've all had it, because without the fever, because everybody was like, if you don't have the fever. So back in February and March, you get sick, and you don't, at that time, we weren't thinking about COVID necessarily. before mid-March. And you wonder if it's more people have had it than we realize,
Absolutely.
because the fever was such a marker, like, and then if you, like you said, you didn't have a fever, but it felt like you just thought, well, I got a really bad cold or flu or something.
Yeah, and to illustrate I think the potential risk to others is that had I not been tested, I do think that in our management of this as a school community, our parents and our staff have done a really great job of erring on the side of caution if there's any sign of illness in the home. We obviously set up the year where students could participate remotely, and we've made some modifications to that through these winter months to allow that to be a more fluid process so families aren't locked in. Again, if they want to go, if their child's displaying cold-like symptoms and they want to go get them a test, we set them up with remote learning for the day where they can stream into the classroom. Whereas at the beginning of the year, we were making that a long-term commitment for planning
Yeah, we
purposes.
talked about that in August. So
Yeah,
it did
yes.
get, you were able to, I think some of that though was the difficulty of having teachers. I think in August, we talked about the difficulty of teachers both teaching remotely and in person, and you didn't have enough teachers to basically split that off. But I think at that time you were deciding whether you were going to have a live feed into the classroom, but that it did get set up then, huh?
We did do that. The one thing in collaboration with our Board of Education, we did have enough funding to hire 2 additional teachers who we have facilitating the online learning for our primary age students. So that's a big help. As you can imagine, the nature of our kids who are 5, 6, 7 years old, it has been of great help to our teachers who are on site to have that support through 2 educators who are working exclusively with remote learners. So that was an important step that we took early in the school year. I don't think we had that in place when we first spoke, but by the end of September, we had set that up. That being said, our teachers are doing a fantastic job of trying to manage or of managing 2 different groups of kids. So our remote learners who are at home and the students who are in person in class. And they're, our teachers are just were exceptional in their ability to take the time to learn and try out different strategies for managing it. It's definitely a learning process,
Yeah.
and I think by and large they've done an excellent job, and it's made the difference between.
Well, they're probably much more comfortable with the technology than they were in March when it went from 0 to 60 in like a week, right? I mean, mid-March,
Right.
we went, what do you anticipate the rest of the year? I mean, this will sort of be what it's like probably for the rest of the year. The vaccines aren't going to be moving that fast that it would change the status quo. But then you look to the fall. I mean, people are hopeful.
Yeah.
Is this something, like you had said earlier, is this something we're just going to have to live with? Not just this virus, but others and this kind of thing happening. But you do think maybe by the fall, enough people will be vaccinated. The teachers obviously will be by then. I mean, are you hopeful that you'll have, I guess the goal would be to have all the high school kids back.
It is. It's our goal. I don't think we've ever lost sight of that. And as you cited earlier, we're becoming, the more time that passes where we don't, the more concerned we become with their emotional and mental well-being. Between sports and extracurriculars and athletics and some of these, the mechanisms and where our kids connect, during the school day. We've seen how appreciative and how much of a difference it has made for our kids, for example, to be able to start athletics, basketball this past week. And it's important for our kids to be able to connect within the school as well. I do think that we're going to be in this environment for a period of time. I may have said earlier in the school year, we're probably we're in a better position now to talk about as a community what it's going to be like to live with COVID, having a certain level of presence in our community, and how can we continue to adapt our strategy to get as many kids in school as it's safe to do so. And just an example of that, and if we look back at the fall now, or if we look ahead to the next fall, which last year was a time of really low community infection. I think we started the school year at less than 1%, or it was right around there.
Yeah.
Do those opening months of the school year become a time where you can have all students in because the community rate of infection is low. We can go from 6 feet to 3 feet distancing in the classrooms. And I'm just thinking out loud here.
Yeah.
And then as we get into the winter post Thanksgiving, as we experienced this year, where infection rates are going to be high, do we then fall back on an alternate model like a hybrid approach and have the students, coming in on an alternate schedule through that period of time? We're in a great position at Haldane because our class sizes are so low at the K-8, and we hope to maintain that into next school year. It hasn't presented as an issue K-8 because we're able to bring all of our kids in. But we have our eye on the high school and what it's going to take or what it would take to get them in. And what I've asked the Department of Health and offered simply just to work the problem. There should be enough information by now to start to determine and come up with some criteria. So it's not, again, being left up to individual school districts. I don't think that's good. I think we should have a uniform a metric or again, continuum to make a determination if it's safe to bring all kids in or if it's not. And that's what I hope, that's the work I hope we're able to do between now and the end of the school year to put us in a good position to open.
It seemed like the state kind of threw out the infection rates and focused on hospitalization. So you wonder if, if there's not a lot of people in the hospitals in Putnam or New York Presbyterian or whatever, do they focus on that? I don't know. I mean, because like we said, maybe there's many more people infected than are being seriously affected by it. But
yeah, I can say when that occurred, that came with a lot of frustration on the part of me and my colleagues, because the metrics that the state had established leading into the school year, I actually thought there was a sound logic to them. And I think what the state realized is that they couldn't facilitate a process to keep schools open with testing, because that was becoming a prerequisite to remain open. So the metric changed. That didn't help instill a sense of confidence at our level in how this was being, in the guidance that we were receiving from the state. But again, I would hope through the spring we have the space, again, because folks are getting vaccinated and hopefully infection rates do go down, that it gives us a little more space to think about what it would take to open safely and what it would take to have all of our students in.
Do you have, I know initially in August we were discussing, I mean, the testing was just not available, but do you have access now to you're doing kind of voluntary random testing of students and stuff?
We are.
So the tests are not as hard to get.
We have what we have. We don't have enough to get us through the school year, but my hope is that the supply chain's been established and that we'll be able to. So for the time being, we have, and we're going to shift our process a little bit where we're going to test a cross section of kids and a few staff members every day at the end of the day, with parent consent. So we'll be, we just met earlier this week to talk through that. In lieu of trying to declare an all remote day in the appointment setting, we're going to try to have a uniform process where every parent gives consent, hopefully, to have their child tested periodically on campus. And then we'll have our nurses facilitate the testing process of a few kids each day. And we just feel that will help us more closely monitor a true cross section of our school community. When we set up the testing days, there's some limitations to that. If families are working and they don't have the ability to bring their children in, we're not really then getting a true cross section of our school community if it's set up that way. So we're going to pivot a little bit and see how this goes. And if we have to adapt and the process again, we'll do so. But I think testing, that's one of those things on that list that I hope is here to stay, because I think that it will enable us to bring more students back.
What does it tell you though? What is it? If you're testing random, I mean, it just tells you the spread. Like if you get 2 out of 50 test positive, you know that it's spreading, right? It's not necessarily aimed at identifying individuals.
No, it's, I mean, it will obviously to a point, but the goal is to use it as a metric to really identify how much, if any, COVID is present in your school, and then how should that dictate your decision-making regarding whether or not school is open. So its purpose really is to determine whether or not the schools are safe in-person learning is safe. So that's how we're positioning it.
Now, circling back to the vaccines, somebody had asked, this is another good question. I mean, can you are the vaccines like mandatory for staff and teachers? Do you think the state hasn't made it mandatory?
They haven't.
But can individual districts make it mandatory?
I don't. I don't believe so. I
Yeah.
haven't asked that specific question,
Right.
but it's a
Well,
good one.
the union would have to be involved in that, I assume. It's
Absolutely. When you're talking about someone's, body
health. Yeah.
and requiring them to become vaccinated, obviously we do it with certain illnesses.
Yeah.
There's a shift in New York on that a couple of years ago where there were exemptions to become vaccinated. Those no longer exist. So if you're
Right.
attending a public school, you have to have certain immunizations. But I don't know if this one, and again, I don't know what the process is for determining if a vaccine is mandatory or not, or what that would look like. I would imagine that would be a lengthy process in determining, because there definitely would be a level of resistance. That being said, at least for our staff, the majority have indicated that they are getting the vaccine or have already gotten it. So
Yeah.
I'm encouraged by that.
Same question for workplaces in general. I mean, not just schools, but do you want to go back to work somewhere in an office building where
Right.
half the people aren't vaccinated and half are? And, what are businesses going to do in
Exactly.
that situation? But let me ask you too quickly about the special needs students. I think in August we discussed that many of them are doing only remote. Or how did that work out as far as the special needs?
No, I think that I have that the other way around. Many,
okay.
we were positioning, when we opened, we did a staggered opening of school. So we phased in certain grade levels and certain groups of students, and we prioritized bringing our special needs students in. I think we had a 2-week phase-in period. So bringing our special needs students in sooner. And we've actually, even at the high school, we've made available to families the ability to have students with special needs come in every day if that was something that we felt was in their best interest. And we're working with our families on that. So from an equity lens, that was something that was really important in our planning process, and that we wanted to make sure that our students with special needs were accommodated. And we felt that those particular students had more to lose by not being in school regularly than their non-disabled peers. So I feel good about the structure that we've set up. And we still had families who opted to just keep them on the hybrid schedule at the high school.
Right.
But in cases where we've seen that hasn't necessarily worked out, our high school team has been very good about engaging our families and recommending a change. And several of our families have done that. So I think that's one thing we did well that we were planning back in August, that we were able to facilitate, and has worked out essentially as planned.
Was there anything in August? I went through the transcript, as I said, and trying to think, was there something that you didn't anticipate that happened? I mean,
Sure.
yeah, I know I don't have an hour, but something that, we talked about a lot of stuff, but it was more really kind of guessing how it was going to come
Sure.
about. We didn't talk about the vaccine, obviously.
No.
Yeah.
So that's a one, obviously. I didn't think the vaccination process would unroll quite as quickly as it did in New York State. If I was speaking to our board, I think in January, right before they opened up the next phase, and I was not optimistic about our staff's ability to secure vaccination appointments anytime soon. And lo and behold, a week to 2 weeks later, a number of our staff may have had their first vaccination already. So that's good news. Chip, quite frankly, if you had asked me behind closed doors in August, how long did I think we would make it into the school year? I don't know if I would have. I was not optimistic that we were going to make it to.
Was today the first day that there wasn't school because of COVID? No.
Today was the first day.
Tracing.
Today, yes. Today was the first day we had to cancel school because of a COVID-related matter. We've had, I should say, we had a case at the high school back in December where we had to go to all remote learning for 2 weeks because of the number of staff who had to quarantine. We couldn't staff the building.
Right.
But today definitely was a first in how it played out. But I would have anticipated that we would have been in October, November, certainly early November, that we were going to be faced with potentially the continued disruption to the week, where we may have said, it's just better from a continuity of instruction standpoint to be all remote for an extended period of time. And I've been pleasantly surprised that we've been able to get into February, and I think this is going to be the more difficult month. January, February, March. Hopefully, the warmer weather comes.
The warmer weather's not till June, but okay.
Right. But I really didn't think we would have quite as much opportunity to have so many kids in person as we have, and I'm really
Well,
and again,
you're seeing the studies. You mentioned this earlier, the importance of these kids to be together,
yes,
to be at school, to socialize. And I found that interesting over the last 9 or 10 months. That started to come out, like that seems to be behind a lot of the talk with Mayor de Blasio, and we got to get the schools open, and
we
Biden
do.
said it's got to be a priority. But you can see it can be done, right? I mean, the schools are not just Haldane, but all schools are kind of managing it pretty well.
It can be done, and I shared with my colleagues last week that, especially when we get into our teenage students who are adolescents or young adults, there's another public health issue that we want to be wary of when it comes to the increasing rates of teen depression right now. That is alarming. And I know that at face value, it may not be what, especially in the middle of a pandemic, what's rising to the top as what's most important in terms of our approach to dealing with it. But I think that if we aren't giving attention to the conversation around what will it take to get all of our kids back in school, we're going to have another real issue on our hands in the near future, if we don't already. I mean, anecdotally, there's certainly case studies or stories that anybody who's working in this sphere is familiar with, that they see as a direct result of kids being home, being disengaged from their peer network or their social network, and not being able to navigate what this environment effectively. And we're used to talking about schools obviously from an academic standpoint, and rightly so, but we also play a critical role in the social and emotional development of our kids in our community. So it's something we need to make sure we're giving attention to, and we're keeping that front and center just as much as our mitigation efforts with COVID.
I found that they just have a shorter horizon. Like you and I can think, well, in 2 or 3 years from now, this this will pass. Like everything else that's happened to us in our life, eventually we move past it. But for a kid, it's like I'm looking at the summer, and I got to do this till the summer. I can't make it to the summer. So with my own kids, just try to tell them, like, you got to look the long term, rather than you're going to get through this month. But I think that is part of it. They don't have the 5-year outlook kind of.
They don't have that life experience, and I think we can all remember being teenagers and what we perceive to be of critical importance at 16. We have that life perspective later on, but the bottom line is that's how our kids feel, and they really struggle. And as you mentioned, it's a tough time of the year, regardless, especially with the winter we've had. But add on to that now the disconnect that many of our students are feeling from each other and from a place, being the school, that tends to be a centerpiece of their social experience. And that's something we need to make sure we're giving a lot of attention to between now and the end of the year. And I do think that as the spring comes, I'm not sold on we have to wait till the fall. And I'm trying not to get ahead of it, but I'm anticipating, even if May and June look like September in terms of community infection rate, can we do something then? Can we change our approach then? I think that would help us for the fall from a planning perspective. So, I'm not there yet in having any plan in place. These are just the questions I'm asking myself and my colleagues as we try to anticipate. So, and that was a critical feature for us this fall. So if we set those back up, and again, the infection rate is low again, can we re-examine our approach to how we bring kids in? The distancing requirements are important. And again, it can't just be an independent school district's decision to do that, whether it be as a county or as a state, we re-examine those guidelines. I think I think we should at least, based on the experience we've had up to this point, and see if there are some additional things we can do for our kids.
Well, we're almost out of time. I did want to get, and of course I have 10 more questions, but
It's
one
okay.
thing that was interested me was the state funding.
Yep.
When do you typically find out how much money you're going to get from the state? And I'm expecting you and the board are anticipating that's going to be less. I mean, the number that got bandied was 20%.
Yeah. So
where's Haldane with that? Can you make up for that, or are there cuts if that happens? Is it going to put you in a tough position? Or?
sure. So we received the governor's executive proposal for the budget just a few weeks ago, which usually changes, but it's a starting point. And based on his executive budget proposal, our funding will remain flat. But the difficulty with that is that we have received some federal stimulus money from the first two relief packages. However, the state offset that by withholding, right? So while, Haldane, for example, may have received, let's just say $200,000 in federal stimulus money, the state withheld $200,000. So, so the concern becomes similar to the environment we were in back in 08, 09 after the housing crisis. Are we setting ourselves up, and is the state setting us up where we're going to have this surplus of federal funding, but the state now is going to withhold or offset their allocations for schools, and that will cause significant financial stress for our school district and for others. The good news is the funding that had been withheld last school year, those 20% allocations, the state has made whole. So that's good. So we didn't end up anticipating any additional debt this year while we were in the middle of the year. So it doesn't help us for next year. It just means we're not making mid-year cuts. And that's a good thing for us. Obviously, that was on the in mind while we were going into the school year. But going into next school year, I do anticipate a level of fiscal stress. A lot has to still play out with what federal money comes to schools, what federal money comes to New York State, and then how does the state facilitate a process for determining its school funding.
Right.
And I think in the next 2 months, we'll know more about that. So generally, as the legislature works with the state budget, that's finalized in, March, early April. So we'll have some idea then, but the federal stimulus package is significant. Obviously, we all have our eyes on that.
The state funding has been pretty, my memory of the budgets over the past couple of years, it's usually a pretty level amount of money. Like it's the same percentage of your budget every year.
Generally, so
from the state. So,
yep.
So
based
the
on need.
The federal together, you just hope that's the same percentage you've gotten in the past.
Yeah. And we spoke of this, I think, in the fall, Chip. It's Haldane is in a very different place than Beacon. Because your state funding is based on your defined need, and there's a formula for that. So generally, the more poverty that exists within your community, the greater level of state aid that you receive. So you're a little more dependent on your state aid figure. So Beacon, which has slightly higher rates of free and reduced lunch, Poughkeepsie, Peekskill, your more urban environments will always be generally, and your real rural environments will generally be more impacted by that dynamic at the state level than we will be, or we are. But we received $2 million in state funding, so consider that it's about 8% of our funding, and it's significant. We obviously $2 million is a lot. It's significant when it comes to how we operate our schools, and that's not something we can make up necessarily because of the tax cap by levying more from the community. So there's a couple other variables that play into that. I think it's going to be a tough year. I think there's going to be, depending on what the recovery looks like when we're on the other side of this, it could be a tough few years financially for school districts. But my hope is, at least in the short term, we're able to maintain a real strong continuity of program for our kids. Obviously, that's the priority. So we're going to make sure that happens.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Anytime,
it's always interesting. I'm sure I know that you did not anticipate any of this when you.
No, none of us did.
You would have been somewhere. You wouldn't, even if you weren't at Haldane, you would have been dealing.
I'd be dealing with this somewhere. You're right. But Chip, I just want to say that the success we have had as a school is a direct result of how our community has approached this. And we live and work in a community that I think has been really good about making the right decisions when it comes to managing ourselves and the way we interact with one another. And that's really helped us keep our school, have the success we've had in the school this year. So
Yeah, I think that I've just observed that myself. I think most people want to, well, they obviously want to keep the kids in school, and that's an easy goal. And the way to do that is to mask up and keep it from spreading, so that it's all about the contact tracing in the end, making it small contact tracing. But
that's right.
We'll see. We'll get there.
We will.
Look forward to the summer.
Me
Thank
too,
you
Chip.
so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chip. Have a good night. Thank you.
Teresa can come back.
All right,
appreciate
excellent. I'm back. Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. We're going to be posting this online for anybody whose friends missed it. We'll be posting it tomorrow. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Teresa. Thanks, Chip.
Good night, everyone.